Immigration reform remains a highly emotionally and politically charged issue, especially in today's political climate. There are enormous challenges to getting any kind of immigration legislation passed and signed into law. Democrats have long pushed for legislation to offer permanent legal protections to undocumented immigrants brought into this country as children. Republicans support this too, but have made it clear that they won't support anything without additional border security, pointing to the humanitarian crisis happening now at the southern border. Republicans are blaming Biden, who they argue has actively encouraged migrants to come by undoing Trump-era policies, while Democrats are largely placing the blame on 4 years of Trump's efforts to seal off the border and dismantle the asylum system. Meanwhile, the spotlight on the border situation isn't going anywhere anytime soon, as more delegations of lawmakers, members of Congress, continue traveling there to observe and discuss what's happening. Given these dynamics, members of Congress from both parties acknowledge that a path forward on comprehensive immigration reform is unlikely, which means reforms are likely going to happen piecemeal. Just a few weeks ago, the House passed, with bipartisan support, a pair of immigration bills, including one that offers legal protections for Dreamers and temporary protected status recipients. An additional sign of encouragement occurred more recently in the Senate, where a group of bipartisan senators met for the first time this Congress to discuss immigration reform and outline parameters of a deal. There are opportunities here, and your advocacy matters. Tell your member of Congress it is critical to work together in a bipartisan, bicameral manner to find solutions. Explain to them that immigration reform matters, especially now, more than ever as we emerge from the pandemic and try to rebuild our workforce. Explain what your needs are and that employers need the ability to recruit and hire a legal workforce. Our common sense immigration reform principles call for 1. Protecting Dreamers and TPS recipients, those that are working here, paying taxes, and contributing to our economy and their communities. We support a clear path to legalization for these workers. 2. Provide needed reforms and cap increases to employment-based visa programs to provide employers with the ability to meet their workforce needs in a timely manner. 3, enact much-needed improvements to our border security that also facilitates legitimate and travel and tourism into this country. And 4, consider a universal federal employment verification system that is efficient and reliable, because absent federal action, there's a patchwork system of state and local laws creating an unworkable system, forcing many restaurants to comply with different laws across multiple jurisdictions. You can find more information about immigration reform in your package of materials. Thanks so much for your engagement, and happy to take any questions.
Thanks for that presentation, Shannon. You used a few sort of negative, pessimistic words. You talked about it being elusive. You talked about being unlikely. By most accounts, immigration reform is unlikely to pass this calendar year, at least. Mm-hmm. So why should restaurant operators still be raising this as one of our top 3 priorities for this year when they're talking to electeds, and why is it so high on our agenda? Because immigration reform is long overdue. And, America still is a land of immigrants and opportunity, and that story and that narrative hasn't changed in many years. And, coming out of the pandemic, as our economy's been decimated, as the industry has hemorrhaged 2 million job losses, we need to build back our workforce, and legal immigration, we know, is going to ensure the ability to recruit, retain, and hire a legal workforce and rebuild our jobs. We mentioned this with Dana Perino earlier, that George W. Bush, President George W. Bush, released an op-ed yesterday in the Washington Post talking about the need, and pushed Republicans a little more to lean in on this issue. What was your takeaway from that op-ed? How much will that motivate Republicans to come in this year and try to move things forward?
It's a great question. I didn't see the op-ed, but I did see the former president, George W. Bush, on the Today Show this morning talking about He views immigration reform, the lack of getting immigration reform, one of his biggest failures. He was a president who campaigned and was very passionate about getting comprehensive immigration reform, obviously coming from Texas, which is a huge border state, understanding the complexities and everything that's involved there. And to your point, he did push Republicans on this. And, I think the opportunity, I may be a little optimistic here, but I think, to get immigration reform, number one, there has to be the political will. I think the political will potentially is there, especially as we're trying to build back the economy and rebuild our workforce. Not just the restaurant industry, but many jobs across many sectors have been decimated, which makes the need for immigration reform even that much more important. And I think that, also politically, members of Congress are very adept at scoring political points on this issue because it is very politically charged and it's an emotional one, as I alluded to in my video. But, I'm optimistic because with this administration, it is something President Biden campaigned on, and as well as congressional Democrats who have the trifecta situation in the White House and the Congress. So I think for our purposes, we need to keep beating the drum, educating members of Congress on what the needs are, and just continue pushing forward.
Shannon, when it comes to E-Verify, operators have really strong views. They know what they like. They know what they don't like. They want to make sure that it's not too onerous a system that's put in place. Tell us what the National Restaurant Association's message to policymakers is when it comes to E-Verify in any comprehensive plan.
Right, and that's a really good question, Sean, and something that we have been very consistent on historically and today. So the association is never going to support a standalone mandatory E-Verify proposal legislation absent reforms that address the massive labor shortage issues that exist in this industry, exacerbated arguably today by the pandemic. So, until we can find solutions and address these visa worker programs, and really fix the overall immigration system, which is broken, we're not going to sign off on an E-Verify proposal without those reforms. Insofar as what we would support on an E-Verify proposal, let me share with you this. We were one of 3 organizations back in the day, back in the Bush era, when there was really, when immigration reform was moving to the center. And we were one of 3 groups that negotiated an E-Verify proposal with then chairman of the House Judiciary Committee, Lamar Smith from Texas. Lamar has since retired, but that legislation has continued to move forward and has been reintroduced this year by Ken Calvert from California. Our principles there are unchanged. There needs to be one universal system, one law of the land. So, as I mentioned before, this patchwork system of state and local laws is really difficult to comply with, particularly for those employers that are operating across multiple jurisdictions. So we need federal preemption to preempt those state and local E-Verify mandates. We also need robust legal protections that are in place for employers that are relying on the government system in good faith. So, by chance, if there's an error in the system, a problem, employers are not held liable for those errors. So those robust legal protections need to be in place. Thirdly, I would say there needs to be a common sense implementation period so that larger firms, larger companies, businesses are going first in line, and that smaller employers, many of which we represent, have a longer phased-in period, and that they are going, in a reasonable time frame. And then fourth, I would say there's got to be a voluntary re-verification process so that that's not mandatory. It's really cumbersome, difficult if that were to be mandatory. To re-verify your workforce can be very cumbersome, very expensive, and quite frankly redundant in many cases. So that's what we would support on E-Verify.
Talk us through, there have been some new updates from the Biden administration on the H-2B program. That's something that's very important to a lot of restaurants, particularly in the seasonal side. Where do things stand with H-2B, and what's the latest?
So some great news to share there with everybody, Sean. We learned late yesterday that the Department of Homeland Security, in consultation with the U.S. Department of Labor, which they are required to do, is going to release additional H-2B visas for the remaining fiscal year. So they're going to release approximately 22,000 additional H-2B visas. We should learn more about that announcement in the days that lie ahead. So that is great news. We welcome that news and those additional visas, particularly as the summer months are upon us. It's going to be a huge help to our industry, but it doesn't solve the problem, because we go back to the administration, Republican or Democrat, whoever's in charge, year after year, to advocate for additional supplemental H-2B visas, and we're continually going back to the Hill to Congress to ask for cap relief, permanent cap relief, solve this problem once and for all. So it's like Groundhog Day. We're continually going back to the well time and time again. So, H-2B visas is part of the visa worker program that needs to be fixed, in addition to a lot of other worker programs. So, welcome the news from DHS, but broader problems to address here.
Shannon, I know that nothing happens. The best way to move things is with bipartisan support, but you obviously also need coalitions.
Yes.
It cannot be just the voice of the restaurant industry on this one. What are some of the other groups that you've been working with that have the same level of activation? Are suppliers engaged on this? I'm sure that the farm community is, but how big is the call right now from folks that are engaged in the restaurant industry?
The employer side, the management side, the business community is very aligned on these issues. We work with a number of coalitions. The H-2B coalition is very broad and very diverse. And obviously, we work a lot with the hotels, because there's a lot of, seamless connectivity between us and the hotels. So we work a lot with them, work a lot with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and many others. So we are part of various coalitions in D.C. working together and very much aligned on many of these issues.
And then how are we looking right now? If it's not going to be comprehensive, and you sound like it's probably not going to be comprehensive right now, you mentioned it's probably going to be piecemeal. What are the core base elements that would really help the restaurant? If we were going to do just various rifle shots, what would those shots be, and what should folks be asking for beyond what you've outlined?
I think it's got to go back to what our principles are. And first and foremost, we've got to find a pathway forward for those that are here, working here in our restaurants, those that are paying taxes, those that are contributing to our communities. And so that is trying to find a pathway to legalization for Dreamers, DACA recipients, TPS recipients that are here. That, to me, that is first and foremost than anything.
Obviously, our group is going to be, our restaurant operators are going to be talking to Republicans and Democrats. You put together a great fact sheet that offers everything that they need to know. Are there elements of immigration reform that are going to particularly resonate with GOP members? Are there particular elements that are going to resonate on the Democratic side, or are these points basically pretty bipartisan?
I think these are bipartisan points, and I think that what you're going to find when you're talking to your member of Congress is there's a lot of interest, and there is a lot of bipartisanship on this issue. Again, it is just trying to force that political will, forcing people from both sides to come together and try to achieve some of these reforms.
Shannon, I'm going to go off script for 1 second, because I have one question we've been just getting so much of, which is, and it's about the RRF, which is the only thing we didn't have time to put in. Aaron did such a good job on his presentation earlier. But tell me about the $28.6 billion is set aside. SBA put out their draft application this weekend. Draft guidance is out there. You're going to be hosting webinars with Aaron. The industry's lost $270 billion through the end of January. 28.6 is probably going to go relatively quickly. Tell us your thoughts running the policy shop on what's the framework of the National Restaurant Association for trying to go back to the well and get another installment of funding. I know that 28.6 isn't even out the door yet, but what's the likelihood in this political climate for Congress allocating more resources for the RRF program later this year?
Thank you for the question. I think, Congresswoman, now Senator Kristen Sinema from Arizona, she touched on this, and I think she gave a brilliant response. But, I will share this, that, Aaron and I have been working diligently since the RRF was implemented, signed into law, working hand in hand in partnership with the SBA to make sure that we were sharing information with them. We've had weekly calls with them. The whole goal here being, we want them to be successful. We want this to be a transparent and a successful program that passes muster with everybody on the Hill, because we know the oversight committees are looking hard, who we've also met with. But our goal is to make this a really successful program, build the SBA up for success so that we can go back to the well and ask for another appropriation, which, everybody, the advantage that we have, Sean, everybody loves our industry. It resonates with everyone. Right. So I'm optimistic that we get more money for this program.
Good. The Shuttered Venues program went online 2 weeks ago. A little bit of a rocky start. The application wasn't quite up to snuff. The FAQ
imploded.
Needed to be pulled, and the website crashed shortly after that. It's still not back up yet. I've heard from a lot of restaurant operators that said, is the RRF rollout going to be the same way? You've had weekends, late night, early morning conversations with the SBA on an ongoing basis. Tell us what your comfort level is with how the rollout of the RF is going so far, and how much restaurant operators should they be optimistic? How concerned should they be about how it relates to shuttered venues?
Well, SBA has been through quite the experience with shuttered venues, and they've learned a lot. I mean, SBA is not in the business of running grant programs. They were tasked to administer this grant program, Shuttered Venues, and now the RRF. They're in the loan business. So, I mean, I'm glad that Shuttered Venues went first, because this has sort of been the test case. And again, we have, Aaron and I and you, we have all been on the phone with the SBA to, really build this out. And I'm very confident that they're going to be successful, because they are using different technology, a different platform than Shuttered Venues. And I'm very confident. We feel good about where things are, and we're really excited to kick off this series of webinars in partnership with them in the coming weeks.
Yeah, a lot of things going on. Thanks for walking us through it. Appreciate it, Shannon Mead.
Thank you for having me.